Hello there and welcome to Science with Sleepy. I'm so glad you found your way here. Maybe you had a long day. Or maybe you're the kind of person who likes falling asleep to deep thoughts and cosmic mysteries, rather than counting sheep. Either way, tonight's journey is for you. You've got nothing to do but rest. Let your mind relax, your breathing slow, and your body grow light as if gravity itself has softened. Because tonight we're traveling back in time, not to stars or galaxies, but to something closer, to the vast, endless ocean. Imagine you're on a wooden boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No land in sight, no compass, no GPS. Just you, the ocean stretching to the horizon in every direction, and the sky above filled with stars. How would you know where you are? How would you know which way to go? How would you find your way home? You'll hear about ancient navigators who crossed entire oceans, using only the stars, the sun, the waves, and their incredible knowledge. About Polynesian wayfinders who settled islands across the Pacific. About Viking explorers who reached North America. About how humans learned to read nature's signs like a map. Some of what you hear tonight may surprise you, or at the very least, spark some curiosity as you drift off to sleep. And just before we begin, if these calm, curious explorations help you unwind or give you a quiet way to end your day, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It helps others find their way here too. One sleepy soul at a time. Now, let's begin. The ocean is vast, more vast than you can imagine. From a boat in the middle of the Pacific, you can't see land in any direction, just water, endless water, blue stretching to the horizon, then more blue beyond that. The ocean covers most of our planet. It's bigger than all the continents combined. And it's featureless. No roads, no signs, no landmarks, just water and sky. The Pacific Ocean alone covers 63 million square miles. That's larger than all the land on Earth combined. It stretches from Asia to the Americas. From the Arctic to Antarctica, it contains thousands of islands. Most are tiny. Many are hundreds of miles apart. Finding them seems impossible. But ancient navigators did it. They found these islands. They settled them. They created cultures across the Pacific. The challenge was enormous. The ocean has no landmarks, no mountains to guide you, no rivers to follow, no roads to travel, just water, endless, featureless water. From a boat, everything looks the same. The horizon is a circle. You're in the center. There's no way to tell which direction is which. There's no way to know where you are. There's no way to know where you're going. Imagine trying to find your way across that, with no compass, no GPS, no maps, just you, your boat, and your knowledge. It seems impossible. How would you know which way to go? How would you know where you are? How would you find your way home? But ancient people did it. They crossed entire oceans. They found tiny islands in the middle of vast seas. They traveled thousands of miles. They did it using only what they could observe: the stars, the sun, the moon, the waves, the birds, the clouds. They learned to read nature like a map. They developed incredible skills. They passed knowledge from generation to generation. The ocean is dangerous. Storms can appear suddenly. Waves can be enormous. Winds can change direction. Currents can pull you off course. Getting lost means running out of food, running out of water, facing death. Navigation wasn't just useful, it was life or death. But people still tried. They had reasons. Maybe they were looking for new lands. Maybe they were following fish. Maybe they were escaping something. Maybe they were just curious. Whatever the reason, they set out. They faced the ocean. They learned its secrets. They mastered navigation. Ancient navigators had simple boats. Wooden boats. Sometimes just logs tied together. Sometimes carved from single trees. Sometimes built with planks. They were small, they were fragile, they could be destroyed by storms. But they worked. They could carry people, they could carry supplies, they could cross oceans. Polynesian canoes were remarkable. They were built from large trees, sometimes from single logs, sometimes from planks sewn together. They had outriggers for stability. They had sails for wind power. They were designed for ocean travel. They were fast. They were seaworthy. They could handle rough seas. They could travel long distances. They were perfect for exploration. They were perfect for navigation. Viking longships were also remarkable. They were long and narrow. They were fast. They were flexible. They could sail in shallow water. They could be rowed when there was no wind. They were designed for exploration. They were designed for raiding. They were designed for navigation. They were perfect for crossing oceans. They were perfect for reaching new lands. Mediterranean ships were different. They were wider. They were more stable. They could carry more cargo. They were designed for trade. They were designed for long voyages. They were designed for navigation. They were perfect for connecting cultures. They were perfect for spreading knowledge. They had no modern tools, no compasses, no GPS, no radios, no engines, just sails, just oars, just wind and muscle. They had to rely on their knowledge, their observation, their memory, their skills. That's all they had, but it was enough. Different cultures developed different techniques. Polynesians in the Pacific, Vikings in the North Atlantic, Mediterranean sailors. Each culture learned to read nature in their own way. Each developed their own methods. Each achieved incredible voyages. Each left a legacy of knowledge. The knowledge was precious. It was passed down carefully, from master to apprentice, from parent to child, from generation to generation. It was memorized. It was practiced. It was tested. It was trusted. This knowledge was the difference between life and death, between finding land and being lost forever. Some of this knowledge has been lost, some has been preserved, some is being rediscovered. Modern scientists study ancient navigation. They learn from traditional navigators, they understand the techniques, they appreciate the achievement, they see the wonder. The loss of knowledge is tragic. When a master navigator died without teaching, the knowledge died with them. When a culture was destroyed, the knowledge was lost. When traditions were broken, the knowledge faded. Some knowledge has been lost forever. We'll never know what was known. We'll never know what was possible. The loss is permanent. The loss is tragic. But some knowledge has been preserved. Traditional navigators have kept it alive. They've passed it down. They've maintained the skills. They've preserved the legacy. The knowledge lives on. The skills continue. The legacy remains. Modern scientists are helping. They're documenting traditional navigation. They're recording the knowledge. They're preserving the skills. They're ensuring that the legacy continues. The work is important. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is significant. The ocean is still vast. It's still dangerous. It's still challenging. But we have modern tools now. Compasses, GPS radios, engines. We can navigate easily. We can find our way. We can be safe. But we shouldn't forget what ancient people achieved. We shouldn't forget their skills. We shouldn't forget their courage. Ancient navigation was an art. It required observation, it required memory, it required courage, it required trust. Trust in knowledge. Trust in nature. Trust in yourself. It was one of humanity's greatest achievements. It allowed exploration. It allowed discovery. It allowed connection. It changed the world. The challenge was enormous. The ocean is the largest feature on Earth. It covers 71% of the planet's surface. That's more than 2/3. Most of our world is water. And most of that water is deep. Very deep. Thousands of feet deep. Miles deep in some places. It's not just surface water. It's a vast, three-dimensional world. From a boat you can't see the bottom, you can't see what's below, you can only see the surface, the waves, the currents, the patterns. You have to read those patterns, you have to understand what they mean, you have to use them to navigate. The ocean has no landmarks. On land, you can use mountains, rivers, trees, buildings, anything that stays in place. But on the ocean, everything moves. The water moves, the waves move, the currents move. Even the boat moves. There's nothing fixed, nothing permanent, nothing to guide you. Except the sky, the stars stay in the same place. The sun rises and sets in predictable ways. The moon follows patterns. The sky is constant. It's reliable. It's your guide. Ancient navigators learned to read the sky like a map. They memorized star positions. They understood the sun's path. They knew the moon's phases. They used the sky to find direction. But the sky isn't always visible. Clouds can block the stars. Storms can hide the sun. Fog can obscure everything. You need other methods. You need to read the ocean itself, the waves, the swells, the currents, the color of the water, the temperature. All of these tell you something. All of these can guide you. Ancient navigators learned to read everything. They became experts at observation. They noticed details we might miss. They saw patterns we might not see. They understood connections we might not understand. They developed incredible skills, skills that took years to learn, skills that required dedication, skills that saved lives. The knowledge was complex, it wasn't simple. It wasn't easy. It required understanding many things: star positions, wave patterns, current flows, bird behavior, cloud formations, weather signs. All of these had to be learned. All of these had to be remembered. All of these had to be used together. Different navigators had different specialties. Some were experts at reading stars. Some were experts at reading waves. Some were experts at reading weather. But the best navigators knew everything. They could use all the methods. They could combine techniques. They could adapt. They could succeed. The knowledge was tested. Every voyage was a test. Every journey proved the methods. Every successful arrival confirmed the knowledge. Every failure taught lessons. The knowledge evolved. It improved. It became more reliable. It became more sophisticated. Archaeologists have found evidence of ancient voyages. They found artifacts on islands. They found evidence of trade. They found evidence of migration. They found evidence that ancient people crossed vast oceans. They found evidence that navigation worked. They found evidence of incredible achievements. On Easter Island, archaeologists have found artifacts from other Pacific islands. This proves that Polynesians reached Easter Island. They crossed thousands of miles of open ocean. They found this tiny island. They settled it. They created a culture there, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation and knowledge. Easter Island is one of the most isolated places on Earth. It's 2,000 miles from the nearest continent. It's 200 miles from the nearest inhabited island. Finding it seems impossible. But Polynesians did it. They found this tiny island. They settled it. They created a culture there. They built the famous Moai statues, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation and knowledge. The achievement is remarkable. Easter Island is tiny. It's only 63 square miles. Finding it in the vast Pacific seems impossible. But Polynesians did it. They crossed thousands of miles. They found this tiny island. They settled it. They created a culture there. The achievement is one of humanity's greatest. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is important. Archaeologists have found evidence of the settlement. They found artifacts. They found evidence of Polynesian culture. They found evidence of traditional navigation. The evidence proves the Polynesians reached Easter Island. They crossed vast oceans. They found tiny islands. They achieved incredible feats, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation and knowledge. In North America, archaeologists have found evidence of Viking settlements. At Lance aux Meadows in Newfoundland, they found the remains of a Viking village. This proves that Vikings reached North America. They crossed the North Atlantic. They found a new continent. They explored it, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation and knowledge. Ancient navigation was a science. It was based on observation. It was based on patterns. It was based on understanding. It wasn't magic. It wasn't guesswork. It was real knowledge, real skills, real achievement. It was one of humanity's greatest accomplishments. The ocean is still there. It's still vast. It's still challenging. But we understand it better now. We have tools. We have knowledge. We have safety. But we should remember. We should remember what ancient people achieved. We should remember their skills. We should remember their courage. We should remember their wonder. Ancient navigation opened the world. It allowed exploration. It allowed discovery. It allowed connection. It allowed trade. It allowed migration. It allowed cultures to meet. It allowed ideas to spread. It changed everything. It made the world smaller. It made the world one. The challenge was met. The ocean was crossed. Islands were found. Continents were reached. The impossible became possible. The unknown became known. The world became connected. All because ancient people learned to navigate. All because they developed skills. All because they had courage. All because they had wonder. The stars were the first guide. Ancient navigators looked up at the night sky and saw patterns. They saw that stars appeared in the same places. They saw that stars moved in predictable ways. They learned to use stars as their compass. They learned to navigate by the heavens. The North Star was especially important. In the Northern Hemisphere there's a star that stays almost in the same place. It's called Polaris. The North Star. It's not the brightest star. But it's special. It's almost directly above the North Pole. So it doesn't move much as the Earth rotates. Other stars circle around it. But Polaris stays put. Ancient navigators learned this. They learned to find Polaris. They learned that if you face Polaris, you're facing north. If Polaris is to your right, you're facing east. If it's to your left, you're facing west. If it's behind you, you're facing south. The North Star became a fixed point. A reference, a guide. But Polaris isn't visible everywhere. In the Southern Hemisphere you can't see it. It's below the horizon. Southern navigators needed different stars. They learned to use the Southern Cross, a constellation of 4 bright stars. They learned how it moves. They learned how to use it to find south. They developed their own methods. Polynesian navigators developed an incredible system. They created a star compass. Not a physical compass, a mental map. They memorized the positions of hundreds of stars. They knew which stars rose where. They knew which stars set where. They knew the paths stars took across the sky. Anthropologists have studied this system. They've worked with traditional navigators from the Caroline Islands. They've documented the star paths. They've recorded the knowledge. They've been amazed by its complexity. The system is sophisticated, it's accurate, it's reliable. It's one of humanity's greatest achievements. A star path is a sequence of stars, stars that rise one after another along the horizon. If you want to sail east, you might watch for a certain star to rise at a certain angle. As the night goes on and that star climbs higher, another star takes its place at the rising point. By following these patterns, navigators can maintain a steady course, even when clouds block parts of the sky, even when visibility is poor. These star paths are often taught through stories and songs. Young apprentices listen as elders recite the names of stars in order, linking each to a direction or a place. In this way, a mental star compass is built, with certain key stars marking the cardinal and intercardinal directions. Unlike a modern magnetic compass with a simple needle, this compass is a network of relationships. This star marks north when it is here. That one marks south when it is there. Research on traditional navigation in Micronesia has found that navigators also pay attention to the height of stars above the horizon. As you travel north or south on Earth, the whole sky seems to tilt. Stars that were low on the horizon rise higher or sink lower. The height of the star Polaris above the northern horizon, for example, gives a good estimate of your latitude in the northern hemisphere. Ancient Greek and Arab sailors used this fact. But even in the southern hemisphere, where there is no bright pole star, navigators can judge their latitude by how high certain familiar constellations climb. They divided the horizon into sections. Each section had stars associated with it. When a certain star rose, they knew which direction they were facing. When a certain star set, they knew which direction they were going. They could navigate by the stars alone. They could find their way across thousands of miles of ocean. The system was incredibly sophisticated. Navigators memorized not just individual stars but entire sequences. They knew that if you're sailing east, certain stars will rise in order. As one star climbs higher, another takes its place at the horizon. By following these sequences, navigators could maintain their course, even when individual stars were hidden by clouds. The system was redundant, it had backups, it was reliable. Modern researchers have documented this system. They've worked with traditional navigators, they've recorded the star paths, they've tested the accuracy. They've found that the system is remarkably precise. Navigators can maintain their course within a few degrees, over thousands of miles, all using only memory. All using only observation, all using only knowledge. Anthropologist David Lewis studied traditional navigation extensively. He sailed with Polynesian navigators in the 1960s. He documented their methods in detail. He tested their accuracy. He found that they could navigate with remarkable precision. They could find tiny islands. They could maintain their course. They could do it all, using only traditional knowledge. His research proved that traditional navigation worked. It wasn't legend, it wasn't luck, it was real knowledge, real skill, real achievement. More recently, researchers from the University of Hawaii have continued this work. They've worked with modern wayfinders. They've tested the methods using modern instruments. They've confirmed the accuracy. They've found that traditional navigators can maintain their course within 2 to 3 degrees, over thousands of miles, all using only memory, all using only observation, all using only knowledge. The research is ongoing. The knowledge is being preserved. The legacy continues. The knowledge was memorized. There were no written star charts, no books, no maps. Everything was in memory. Master navigators memorized hundreds of star positions. They memorized star paths, they memorized star names, they memorized everything. This took years, decades, a lifetime of learning. The knowledge was passed down carefully. From master to apprentice, the apprentice would learn star by star, position by position, path by path. They would practice, they would test, they would memorize, until they knew the sky, as well as they knew their own hands, until navigation became instinct, until they could navigate in their sleep. The training was rigorous. It took years, sometimes decades. Apprentices would start young. They would learn the basics first. Simple star positions, simple directions. Then they would learn more complex patterns, star paths, swell patterns, bird behavior. They would practice constantly. They would test their knowledge. They would improve their skills. The training began early. Children would start learning as soon as they could understand. They would learn star names. They would learn star positions. They would learn simple patterns. The training was gradual. It was careful. It was thorough. It ensured that the knowledge was deeply understood. It ensured that the skills were well developed. It ensured that the legacy continued. As apprentices grew older, the training became more complex. They would learn star paths. They would learn to read swells. They would learn to read birds. They would learn everything. The training was comprehensive. It was demanding. It was rewarding. It produced expert navigators. It produced wayfinders. It produced keepers of knowledge. The training included practical experience. Apprentices would go on voyages. They would practice navigation. They would test their skills. They would learn from experience. The training was hands-on. It was real. It was valuable. It ensured that the knowledge was practical. It ensured that the skills were reliable. It ensured that the legacy continued. The master would test the apprentice. They would take them on voyages. They would ask them to navigate. They would watch their performance. They would correct mistakes. They would teach lessons. They would ensure the knowledge was passed down correctly. They would ensure the skills were maintained. They would ensure the legacy continued. The testing was rigorous. Apprentices would be asked to identify stars. They would be asked to read swells. They would be asked to navigate. They would be tested constantly. They would be challenged. They would be pushed. They would be taught. They would learn. They would improve. They would become experts. They would become wayfinders. They would continue the legacy. The relationship between master and apprentice was special. The master had dedicated their life to navigation. They had learned from their master. They had become experts. They had achieved incredible feats. Now they were passing it down. They were teaching the next generation. They were ensuring that the knowledge continued. They were ensuring that the legacy lived on. The apprentice had to prove themselves. They had to show dedication. They had to show skill. They had to show understanding. They had to earn the knowledge. They had to earn the trust. They had to earn the right to become a wayfinder. The process was long. The process was difficult, but it was necessary. It ensured that only the best became wayfinders. It ensured that the knowledge was preserved. It ensured that the legacy continued. The knowledge was precious. It was the difference between life and death, between finding land and being lost, between success and failure. It was treated with respect. It was protected. It was valued. It was the most important knowledge a culture could have. It was the foundation of exploration. It was the foundation of discovery. It was the foundation of connection. The knowledge was often secret. Not everyone was allowed to learn it. Only those who showed promise. Only those who showed dedication. Only those who earned the right. The knowledge was protected. It was guarded. It was valued. It was the most important knowledge a culture could have. The knowledge was passed down through stories, through songs, through direct experience, It wasn't written down, it wasn't documented, it was memorized, it was practiced, it was tested, it was trusted. The knowledge lived in memory. It lived in practice. It lived in tradition. It was the foundation of exploration. It was the foundation of discovery. It was the foundation of connection. The loss of knowledge was devastating. When a master navigator died without teaching, the knowledge died with them. When a culture was destroyed, the knowledge was lost. When traditions were broken, the knowledge faded. Some knowledge has been lost forever. Some knowledge is being rediscovered. Some knowledge is being preserved. The knowledge is precious. It must be protected. It must be valued. It must be passed down. The stars change with the seasons. As the Earth orbits the Sun, different stars are visible at different times. Stars that are visible in summer might not be visible in winter. Ancient navigators learned this. They learned which stars were visible when. They learned the seasonal patterns. They adjusted their navigation accordingly. They also learned the daily patterns. Stars rise in the east. They set in the west. They move across the sky. The pattern is predictable. Ancient navigators learned to read this movement. They learned to use it. They learned to navigate by it. The sun was another guide. It rises in the east. It sets in the west. It moves across the sky during the day. Ancient navigators learned to use the sun's position. They learned to tell direction from the sun. They learned to tell time from the sun. They learned to navigate by the sun. But the sun's path changes with the seasons. In summer it rises more to the north. In winter it rises more to the south. The path across the sky changes. Ancient navigators learned these patterns. They learned to account for them. They learned to use them. The sun's position at noon was especially useful. At noon, the sun is at its highest point. In the northern hemisphere, it's always to the south. In the southern hemisphere, it's always to the north. Ancient navigators used this. They could find direction at noon. They could orient themselves. They could navigate. The moon was also useful. It follows predictable patterns. It has phases. It rises and sets at different times. Ancient navigators learned these patterns. They learned to use the moon. They learned to navigate by it, especially when stars were hidden by clouds. But the moon is less reliable than stars. Its position changes more. Its path is more complex. It's harder to use for precise navigation, but it's still useful. It's still a guide. It's still better than nothing. Ancient navigators combined methods. They used stars when they could. They used the sun during the day. They used the moon when needed. They used everything available. They were flexible. They were adaptable. They were resourceful. The knowledge was tested constantly. Every voyage tested the methods. Every journey confirmed or corrected the knowledge. Navigators learned from experience. They improved their techniques. They refined their methods. The knowledge evolved. It became more accurate. It became more reliable. Each voyage was a learning experience. Navigators would observe carefully. They would note what worked. They would note what didn't. They would adjust their methods. They would improve their skills. They would refine their knowledge. The knowledge was constantly evolving. It was constantly improving. It was constantly becoming more reliable. Failed voyages were also valuable. They taught lessons. They showed what didn't work. They showed what to avoid. They showed what to improve. Navigators learned from failures. They learned from mistakes. They learned from experience. The knowledge grew. It became more sophisticated. It became more reliable. Successful voyages confirmed the knowledge. They proved that the methods worked. They proved that the skills were valuable. They proved that the knowledge was reliable. They inspired confidence. They inspired others. They ensured that the knowledge continued. The knowledge was tested. The knowledge was confirmed. The knowledge was trusted. Modern scientists have studied ancient navigation. They've tested the methods. They've confirmed the accuracy. They've been amazed. Ancient navigators could find tiny islands. They could navigate across thousands of miles. They could do it with incredible precision, all using only the stars. All using only observation. All using only knowledge. The achievement is remarkable. Ancient navigators developed sophisticated methods. They created mental maps of the sky. They memorized hundreds of star positions. They understood complex patterns. They achieved incredible accuracy. They did it all without modern tools. They did it all with observation and memory. They did it all with knowledge and skill. The stars are still there. They're still in the same places, they still follow the same patterns. Modern navigators can still use them. But we have easier methods now. We have compasses. We have GPS. We don't need to memorize star positions. We don't need to navigate by the heavens. But we should remember what ancient people achieved. We should remember their skills. We should remember their knowledge. We should remember their wonder. Ancient celestial navigation was an art. It required observation. It required memory. It required understanding. It required practice. It required dedication. It was one of humanity's greatest achievements. It allowed exploration. It allowed discovery. It allowed connection. It changed the world. The stars guided ancient people across oceans. They found islands. They reached continents. They explored the world, all using the stars, all using observation, all using knowledge. The stars were their compass, the stars were their guide, the stars were their map. The stars opened the world. The ocean itself was a guide. Ancient navigators learned to read the ocean. They learned to read waves. They learned to read swells. They learned to read currents. They learned to read the water itself. The ocean told them where they were. The ocean told them where to go. Ocean swells are long waves. They travel across vast distances. They can come from thousands of miles away. They maintain their direction for hundreds of kilometers. Ancient navigators learned this. They learned to feel swells. They learned to read their direction. They learned to use them. Oceanographers have studied swells. They've found that swells can travel thousands of miles. They maintain their direction. They maintain their energy. They're created by distant storms. They're created by distant winds. They travel across entire oceans. They're like messages from far away. Ancient navigators learned to read these messages. Swells are different from waves. Waves are local. They're created by nearby wind. They're choppy. They're irregular. Swells are different. They're smooth. They're regular. They have long periods. They have consistent direction. They're like the ocean's heartbeat. Ancient navigators learned to feel this heartbeat. They learned to read its rhythm. They learned to use it. Polynesian navigators were masters of this. They learned to feel different swells. Some swells came from the north, some from the south, some from the east, some from the west. Each had a different feel. Each had a different pattern. Each told a different story. Lying in their canoes, navigators would feel the motion. The rhythm told them direction. Each swell had its own story. By feeling the motion, they could tell which way swells were coming from. They could tell which way land was. They could navigate by feel alone. The skill is incredible. Modern oceanographers use instruments to measure swells. They use buoys. They use satellites. They use computers. But ancient navigators used only their bodies. They felt the motion. They felt the rhythm. They felt the direction. They could distinguish between different swells. They could tell which swell came from which direction. They could use this information to navigate. Scientists have tested this. They've taken traditional navigators out on the ocean. They've asked them to identify swell directions. The navigators have been remarkably accurate. They can identify swell directions within a few degrees. They can do it consistently. They can do it reliably. All using only feel. All using only their bodies. All using only their knowledge. The skill requires incredible sensitivity. Navigators must feel subtle differences. They must distinguish between multiple swells. They must read complex patterns. They must do it while the boat is moving, while waves are interfering, while conditions are changing. The skill is remarkable. The accuracy is incredible. The achievement is extraordinary. The training for this skill is extensive. Apprentices spend years learning to feel swells. They practice in different conditions. They practice in different boats. They practice until they can feel the subtlest differences. They practice until they can distinguish between multiple swells. They practice until they can read complex patterns. The training is rigorous. The skill is remarkable. The achievement is extraordinary. The skill is not just physical, it's also mental. Navigators must understand what they're feeling. They must interpret the patterns. They must use the information. They must combine it with other knowledge. They must navigate by feel. They must navigate by knowledge. They must navigate by skill. The combination is powerful. The result is remarkable. The achievement is extraordinary. Modern scientists have studied this skill. They've tested navigators. They've confirmed the accuracy. They've been amazed. The skill is real, it's accurate, it's reliable. It's remarkable. The achievement is extraordinary. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is important. Researchers have studied how navigators do this. They found that navigators use their entire bodies. They feel the motion in their bones. They feel the rhythm in their muscles. They feel the direction in their balance. They become one with the ocean. They read its language. They understand its signs. They navigate by feel. They navigate by knowledge. They navigate by skill. This skill took years to develop. It required practice. It required sensitivity. It required understanding. Not everyone could do it. Only the best navigators. Only those who dedicated their lives to learning. Only those who became one with the ocean. Ocean currents also guided navigation. Currents flow in predictable patterns. They flow like rivers in the ocean. Ancient navigators learned these patterns. They learned where currents flowed. They learned how to use them. They learned how to avoid them when needed. Mediterranean sailors were experts at this. They learned the currents of the Mediterranean Sea. They learned how currents flowed between continents. They learned how to use currents to travel. They learned how to use currents to return. Currents became their highways. Currents became their guides. The Gulf Stream is a famous current. It flows from the Gulf of Mexico. It flows up the east coast of North America. It flows across the Atlantic. Ancient navigators may have used it. They may have followed it. They may have used it to travel. They may have used it to return. Oceanographers have studied the Gulf Stream. They found that it's a powerful current. It flows at speeds up to 5 miles per hour. It's warm. It's distinct. It's easy to detect. Ancient navigators may have learned to recognize it. They may have learned to use it. They may have learned to follow it. The knowledge would have been valuable. It would have been useful. It would have been reliable. The Gulf Stream affects navigation. Ships traveling with it move faster. Ships traveling against it move slower. Ancient navigators may have learned this. They may have planned their routes accordingly. They may have used the current to their advantage. The knowledge would have been valuable. It would have been useful. It would have been reliable. Other currents also affected navigation. The Kuroshio Current in the Pacific. The Aguilhas Current in the Indian Ocean. The Brazil Current in the South Atlantic. Each current has its own characteristics. Each current affects navigation. Ancient navigators may have learned these patterns. They may have used them. They may have navigated by them. The knowledge would have been valuable. It would have been useful. It would have been reliable. Currents can be strong. They can push ships off course. They can help ships travel faster. They can be dangerous. They can be helpful. Ancient navigators learned to read them. They learned to use them. They learned to respect them. Watercolor also told stories. Near land, water changes color. It might be greener, it might be browner, it might be clearer, it might be cloudier. Ancient navigators learned these signs. They learned to read watercolor. They learned to find land. Oceanographers have studied this. They found that watercolor changes near land for several reasons. Sediment from rivers makes water browner. Shallow water over coral reefs makes water greener. Different types of land create different colors. Ancient navigators learned to read these subtle changes. They learned to find land by color alone. The skill is remarkable. Modern scientists use satellites to measure watercolor. They use instruments, they use computers. But ancient navigators used only their eyes. They could see subtle color changes. They could distinguish between different shades. They could use this information to navigate. They could find land by color. Even when land was over the horizon, even when land was invisible. Water temperature also changed. Near land, water might be warmer or cooler. It depends on the land. It depends on the currents. Ancient navigators learned these patterns. They learned to read temperature. They learned to use it. The feel of the water changed. Near land, waves might be different. They might be choppier. They might reflect off coastlines. They might have different patterns. Ancient navigators learned to feel these changes. They learned to read them. They learned to use them. All of these methods combined: swells for direction, currents for travel, color for land, temperature for position, feel for proximity. Ancient navigators used everything. They read the ocean like a book. They understood its language. They navigated by its signs. The knowledge was passed down from master to apprentice, from generation to generation. The knowledge was tested. Every voyage tested it. Every journey confirmed it. The knowledge evolved. It improved. It became more sophisticated. The process of passing down knowledge was careful. Masters would teach slowly. They would ensure understanding. They would test constantly. They would correct mistakes. They would ensure accuracy. They would ensure that the knowledge was preserved. They would ensure that the skills were maintained. They would ensure that the legacy continued. The knowledge was often secret. Not everyone was allowed to learn it. Only those who showed promise. Only those who showed dedication. Only those who earned the right. The knowledge was protected, it was guarded, it was valued, it was the most important knowledge a culture could have. The loss of knowledge was devastating. When a master navigator died without teaching, the knowledge died with them. When a culture was destroyed, the knowledge was lost. When traditions were broken, the knowledge faded. Some knowledge has been lost forever. Some knowledge is being rediscovered. Some knowledge is being preserved. The knowledge is precious. It must be protected. It must be valued. It must be passed down. Modern scientists have studied this. They've tested the methods. They've confirmed the accuracy. They've been amazed. Ancient navigators could read swells. They could feel currents. They could find land by watercolor. They could navigate by the ocean itself. All using observation. All using knowledge. All using skill. The ocean is still there. It still has swells, it still has currents, it still has patterns. Modern navigators can still read them. But we have easier methods now. We have instruments, we have technology. We don't need to feel swells, we don't need to read watercolor. But we should remember. We should remember what ancient people achieved. We should remember their skills. We should remember their knowledge. Ancient ocean navigation was an art. It required observation. It required sensitivity. It required understanding. It required practice. It required dedication. It was one of humanity's greatest achievements. It allowed exploration. It allowed discovery. It allowed connection. It changed the world. The ocean guided ancient people. They read its signs. They understood its language. They navigated by its patterns. They found islands. They reached continents. They explored the world, all using the ocean itself. All using observation. All using knowledge. The ocean was their guide. The ocean was their map. The ocean opened the world. Nature provided other guides. Ancient navigators learned to read everything around them. They learned to read birds. They learned to read whales. They learned to read clouds. They learned to read weather. They learned to read all of nature's signs. Nature became their guide. Nature became their map. Birds were especially useful. Different birds behave differently. Some birds stay close to land. Some birds fly far out to sea. Some birds return to land at night. Some birds fly in certain directions. Ancient navigators learned these patterns. They learned to read birds. They learned to use them. Vikings were masters of this. They learned that gulls stay close to shore, usually within 20 miles. If you see gulls, land isn't far. Different birds meant different things. Puffins meant rocky coasts. Terns meant sandy beaches. Vikings learned to read these signs. They turned birds into navigation tools. They also used ravens. Vikings would carry ravens on their ships. When they were uncertain about direction, they'd release a raven. Ravens don't like to fly far from land. They're smart birds. They know where food is. If the raven flew in a certain direction, that meant land was that way. If the raven circled the ship, it meant no land was nearby. The bird became a living compass. There's a famous story about this. In the sagas there's a tale of Floki Vilgedarsson. He was exploring Iceland. He released ravens to find land. The first raven flew back to Norway. The second raven flew up and came back. The third raven flew southwest. Floki followed it and found Iceland. The story is told in the Landnámabók, an ancient Icelandic text. It describes how Floki used ravens to navigate. It shows how Vikings used birds as guides. It demonstrates the knowledge they had. It proves that the methods worked. It shows that ancient navigation was real. It shows that the knowledge was valuable. It shows that the skills were remarkable. The story has been passed down for centuries. It's been told and retold. It's become part of the culture. It's become part of the legacy. It shows how Vikings navigated. It shows how they explored. It shows how they achieved incredible feats. The story is important. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is significant. Polynesian navigators also used birds. They learned that certain seabirds fly out to sea in the morning to feed. They return to land in the evening. By watching the direction birds flew, navigators could estimate the direction to the nearest land, even when it was too far away to see, even when it was over the horizon. They learned bird flight patterns. Birds flying in a straight line usually meant land was that way. Birds flying in circles usually meant no land was nearby. Birds flying high usually meant they were going far. Birds flying low usually meant they were going near. Ancient navigators learned all these patterns. They learned to read birds like a map. The knowledge was specific. Different birds meant different things. Gulls meant land within 20 miles. Terns meant sandy beaches. Puffins meant rocky coasts. Each bird had its own meaning. Each pattern had its own significance. Ancient navigators learned all of these. They learned to read birds, like a detailed map. They learned to use birds as precise guides. The knowledge was accumulated over generations. Each navigator learned from experience. Each voyage added knowledge. Each observation improved understanding. Navigators learned that certain birds meant certain things. Certain patterns meant certain conditions. The patterns were learned. The knowledge was accumulated. The skills were developed. Modern ornithologists have confirmed this. They've studied bird behavior. They've found that birds do follow patterns. They do indicate land. They do provide navigation clues. Ancient navigators learned to read these patterns. They learned to use them. They learned to navigate by them. The knowledge was sophisticated. It was accurate. It was reliable. Whales and marine life also provided clues. Whales follow certain migration patterns. They follow currents. They follow food. Ancient navigators learned these patterns. They learned to follow whales. They learned to use whales as guides. Whales also indicated currents. Where whales were, currents were usually strong. Where currents were strong, navigation was easier. Ancient navigators learned this. They learned to find whales. They learned to follow them. They learned to use them. Other marine life also helped. Schools of fish indicated currents. Seaweed indicated proximity to land. Jellyfish indicated water temperature. Ancient navigators learned to read all of these. They learned to use everything. They learned to navigate by nature. The knowledge was comprehensive. Navigators learned to read everything. Fish patterns, seaweed patterns, jellyfish patterns. All of these provided clues. All of these could be used. All of these helped navigation. The knowledge was extensive. It was detailed. It was valuable. The knowledge was accumulated over time. Each observation added information. Each voyage improved understanding. Each navigator contributed. The knowledge grew. It became more sophisticated. It became more reliable. It became an art. It became a science. It became a legacy. Some knowledge was lost. When cultures were destroyed, knowledge was lost. When traditions were broken, knowledge faded. When masters died without teaching, knowledge died with them. The loss was permanent. The loss was tragic. But some knowledge survived. Some knowledge was preserved. Some knowledge is being rediscovered. The knowledge that remains is precious. It must be protected. It must be valued. It must be passed down. Modern marine biologists have confirmed this. They've studied marine life patterns. They found that these patterns are real, they're measurable, they're useful. Ancient navigators learned to read these patterns. They learned to use them. They learned to navigate by them. The knowledge was sophisticated. It was accurate. It was reliable. Clouds were another guide. Clouds form differently over land than over water. Over land, clouds might be darker, more defined, more stationary. Over water, they're often lighter, more spread out, more mobile. Ancient navigators learned these patterns. They learned to read clouds. They learned to use them. Clouds also indicated weather. Dark clouds meant storms. Light clouds meant fair weather. High clouds meant distant weather. Low clouds meant nearby weather. Ancient navigators learned to read these signs. They learned to predict weather. They learned to prepare. Cloud formations over land were especially useful. Islands create their own cloud formations. Mountains create their own cloud patterns. Ancient navigators learned to recognize these. They learned to find land by clouds. Even when land was over the horizon, even when land was invisible. Meteorologists have studied this. They found that islands create specific cloud patterns. The clouds form over the land, they rise above it, they create distinctive shapes. Ancient navigators learned to recognize these patterns. They learned to find land by clouds. Even when land was invisible, even when land was over the horizon. The skill required incredible observation. Navigators had to notice subtle differences. They had to distinguish between different cloud types. They had to read complex patterns. They had to do it while conditions were changing, while visibility was varying. While clouds were moving, the skill is remarkable, the accuracy is incredible, the achievement is extraordinary. The knowledge was accumulated over generations. Each navigator learned from experience. Each voyage added knowledge. Each observation improved understanding. Navigators learned that certain cloud patterns meant islands. Certain patterns meant mountains. Certain patterns meant no land. The patterns were learned. The knowledge was accumulated. The skills were developed. Weather patterns also guided navigation. Winds changed near land. They might shift direction. They might get stronger or weaker. They might have different patterns. Ancient navigators learned to feel these changes. They learned to read wind. They learned to use it. They also learned to smell the air. Land has different smells than open ocean. Forests smell like pine and earth. Grasslands smell like grass and flowers. Deserts smell dry and dusty. Ancient navigators trained their noses. They could smell land before they saw it, sometimes from miles away. They learned to taste the water. Fresh water from rivers mixes with salt water near shore. The water becomes less salty. Ancient navigators could taste this difference. They knew when they were getting close to a river mouth. This was especially useful. River mouths were often good places to land, good places to find fresh water, good places to explore. All of these methods combined, birds for land direction, whales for currents, clouds for weather and land, wind for direction, smell for proximity, taste for rivers. Ancient navigators used everything. They read nature like a book. They understood its language. They navigated by its signs. The knowledge was accumulated over generations. Each navigator learned from experience. Each voyage added knowledge. Each observation improved understanding. The knowledge grew. It became more sophisticated. It became more reliable. It became an art. The observation skills required were incredible. Ancient navigators noticed details we might miss. They saw patterns we might not see. They understood connections we might not understand. They developed incredible sensitivity. They became one with nature. They learned to read its language. They learned to understand its signs. The knowledge was specific to each culture. Polynesian navigators learned the patterns of the Pacific. Viking navigators learned the patterns of the North Atlantic. Mediterranean navigators learned the patterns of the Mediterranean. Each culture developed its own knowledge. Each culture created its own methods. Each culture achieved its own feats. The knowledge was regional, it was specific, it was valuable. But there were also similarities. All cultures learned to use the stars. All cultures learned to use the sun. All cultures learned to read nature's signs. The similarities show that the knowledge was universal. The patterns were universal. The principles were universal. The knowledge was both specific and general. It was both local and universal. It was both regional and global. Some historians debate whether different cultures learned from each other. Did Polynesians influence Vikings? Did Mediterranean sailors influence Polynesians? The evidence is unclear. But what is clear is that each culture developed sophisticated methods. Each culture achieved incredible feats. Each culture left a legacy of knowledge. The achievement is remarkable, regardless of whether they learned from each other or developed independently. But some knowledge was universal. Stars rise in the east. They set in the west. The sun moves across the sky. Swells come from distant storms. Birds return to land. These patterns were learned across cultures. They were shared. They were universal. The knowledge was both specific and general. It was both local and universal. It was both regional and global. Ornithologists have studied bird navigation. They found that birds have incredible navigation abilities. They use the sun, they use the stars, they use magnetic fields. They use landmarks. Ancient navigators learned to read bird behavior. They learned to use birds as guides. They learned to find land by following birds. The knowledge was sophisticated. It was accurate. It was reliable. Marine biologists have studied whale migration. They found that whales follow predictable patterns. They migrate along specific routes. They follow currents. They follow food. Ancient navigators learned these patterns. They learned to follow whales. They learned to use whales as guides. The knowledge was valuable. It was useful. It was reliable. Meteorologists have studied cloud formations. They found that clouds form differently over different surfaces. Over land, clouds are often darker, more defined. Over water, clouds are often lighter, more spread out. Ancient navigators learned to read these differences. They learned to find land by clouds. Even when land was invisible, the knowledge was remarkable. It was accurate. It was useful. Modern scientists have tested all these methods. They've confirmed the accuracy. They've been amazed. Ancient navigators could find land by birds. They could find currents by whales. They could predict weather by clouds. They could navigate by nature itself, all using observation, all using knowledge, all using skill. The achievement is remarkable. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is important. Nature is still there. Birds still fly. Whales still migrate. Clouds still form. Weather still changes. Modern navigators can still read these signs. But we have easier methods now. We have instruments. We have technology. We don't need to read birds. We don't need to follow whales. But we should remember. We should remember what ancient people achieved. We should remember their skills. We should remember their knowledge. Ancient nature navigation was an art. It required observation. It required understanding. It required connection. It required practice. It required dedication. It was one of humanity's greatest achievements. It allowed exploration, it allowed discovery, it allowed connection, it changed the world. Nature guided ancient people, they read its signs, they understood its language. They navigated by its patterns, they found islands, they reached continents, they explored the world. All using nature itself, all using observation, all using knowledge. Nature was their guide. Nature was their map. Nature opened the world. Different cultures achieved incredible voyages. Polynesian wayfinders crossed the entire Pacific Ocean. Viking explorers reached North America. Mediterranean sailors connected continents. Each culture developed their own methods. Each achieved remarkable feats. Each left a legacy of knowledge. Polynesian wayfinders were among the greatest navigators. They settled islands across the Pacific. From Hawaii to New Zealand, from Easter Island to Tahiti, they crossed thousands of miles of open ocean. They found tiny islands. They did it all without modern tools. They did it all using traditional methods. The settlement of Hawaii was remarkable. Polynesians sailed from the Marquesa Islands. They crossed 2,000 miles of open ocean. They found Hawaii. They settled it. They created a culture there, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation, all using only knowledge. The achievement was remarkable. The voyage was historic. The legacy was important. The settlement of New Zealand was even more remarkable. Polynesians sailed from central Polynesia. They crossed 500 miles of open ocean. They found New Zealand. They settled it. They created a culture there. They became the Maori people, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation, all using only knowledge. The achievement was incredible. The voyage was historic. The legacy was important. The settlement of Easter Island was the most remarkable. Polynesians sailed from central Polynesia. They crossed 2,000 miles of open ocean. They found Easter Island, one of the most isolated places on Earth. They settled it. They created a culture there. They built the famous Mo statues, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation, all using only knowledge. The achievement was extraordinary. The voyage was historic. The legacy was important. The Pacific Ocean is vast. It's the largest ocean on Earth. It covers 1/3 of the planet's surface. It's bigger than all the continents combined. Finding small islands in that vastness seems impossible. But Polynesians did it. They found hundreds of islands. They settled them. They created cultures across the Pacific. The achievement is remarkable when you consider the scale. The Pacific covers 63 million square miles. It contains thousands of islands. Most are tiny. Many are hundreds of miles apart. Finding them seems impossible. But Polynesians did it. They found hundreds of islands. They settled them. They created cultures across the Pacific. The distances were enormous. From the Marquesas to Hawaii is 2,000 miles. From Tahiti to New Zealand is 500 miles. From the Cook Islands to Easter Island is 2,000 miles. These are vast distances. Finding tiny islands in that vastness seems impossible. But Polynesians did it. They found these islands. They settled them. They created cultures there. The achievement is one of humanity's greatest. Polynesians settled the entire Pacific. They found hundreds of islands. They crossed thousands of miles. They did it all without modern tools. They did it all using traditional methods. They did it all using only observation and knowledge. The achievement is remarkable. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is important. Genetic studies have confirmed the settlement patterns. DNA analysis shows that Polynesians share common ancestry. They came from the same source. They spread across the Pacific. They settled hundreds of islands. The genetic evidence matches the archaeological evidence. It confirms the settlement patterns. It confirms the navigation achievements. It confirms that Polynesians achieved incredible feats, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation and knowledge. Linguistic studies also confirm the connections. Polynesian languages are related. They share common words. They share common structures. This shows that Polynesians came from the same source. They spread across the Pacific. They maintained connections. They achieved incredible feats. The linguistic evidence matches the genetic evidence. It confirms the settlement patterns. It confirms the navigation achievements. It confirms that Polynesians achieved incredible feats. How did they do it? They developed an incredible navigation system. They memorized star positions. They learned to read ocean swells. They learned to read birds. They learned to read clouds. They learned to read everything. They created mental maps of the Pacific. They navigated by memory. They navigated by knowledge. The knowledge was passed down carefully. Master navigators taught apprentices. The training took years, decades, a lifetime. Apprentices learned star by star, swell by swell, island by island. They memorized everything. They practiced constantly. They became experts. They became wayfinders. One famous navigator was Mau Piailug. He was from the Caroline Islands. He learned traditional navigation as a child. He became a master wayfinder. In 1976, he guided the canoe Hokulea from Hawaii to Tahiti, using only traditional methods, no instruments, no modern tools, just stars, just swells, just knowledge. Mau was born on the island of Satawal. He learned navigation from his grandfather. He began learning as a child. He memorized star positions. He learned to read swells. He learned to read birds. He learned everything. He became a master. He became a wayfinder. He became a legend. The voyage of the Hokulea was historic. It was the first long-distance voyage, using only traditional methods, in modern times. It proved that traditional navigation worked. It wasn't legend. It wasn't luck. It was real knowledge, real skill, real achievement. The voyage inspired others. It helped revive traditional navigation. It showed that ancient methods were still viable. Mau's navigation relied on multiple techniques working together. During the day, he watched the sun's position and the direction of ocean swells. Swells can maintain their direction for hundreds of kilometers. At night, he used star paths, watching which stars rose and set along the horizon. He also paid attention to birds. Certain seabirds fly out to sea in the morning to feed, and return to land in the evening. By watching the direction birds flew, Mau could estimate the direction to the nearest land. Even when it was too far away to see, the voyage demonstrated that traditional navigation was not just legend or luck. It was a sophisticated system that could reliably guide voyagers across thousands of kilometers of open ocean. Since that first voyage, the Hokulea has made many more journeys using traditional methods, helping to revive interest in Polynesian navigation, proving that these ancient techniques remain viable, even in the modern world. The success of these voyages has inspired new generations to learn traditional wayfinding, ensuring that this knowledge continues to be passed down. The voyage was 500 miles. It took 33 days. Mau navigated the entire way. He used star paths. He used ocean swells. He used birds. He used everything he knew. When scientists later compared his course with modern charts, they found his navigation was remarkably accurate. He had found his way across thousands of miles, using only traditional knowledge. The voyage was carefully documented. Scientists tracked the Hokulea's position using modern GPS. They compared it with Mau's estimates. They found that Mau's navigation was accurate within a few miles. Over thousands of miles. Over 33 days. All using only traditional methods. All using only observation. All using only knowledge. The achievement was remarkable. The accuracy was incredible. The skill was extraordinary. Ben Finney was one of the scientists who documented the voyage. He was an anthropologist. He studied traditional navigation. He helped organize the voyage. He documented everything. He compared Mau's estimates with GPS data. He found that Mau's navigation was accurate within 2 to 3 miles. Over 500 miles. Over 33 days. The accuracy was incredible. The skill was extraordinary. The achievement was remarkable. The documentation was thorough. Scientists recorded the weather. They recorded the sea conditions. They recorded Mao's estimates, they recorded the actual positions, they compared everything, they analyzed the data, they confirmed the accuracy. The documentation proved that traditional navigation worked. It wasn't legend, it wasn't luck, it was real knowledge, real skill, real achievement. The voyage inspired a revival of traditional navigation. Young people began learning the old methods. They began studying with traditional navigators. They began practicing the skills. They began preserving the knowledge. The revival was important. It ensured that the knowledge continued. It ensured that the legacy lived on. It ensured that the wonder remained. Today there are schools teaching traditional navigation in Hawaii, in the Caroline Islands, in other Pacific islands. Young people are learning the star paths. They're learning to read swells. They're learning to read birds. They're learning everything. They're becoming wayfinders. They're continuing the legacy. They're ensuring that the knowledge survives. They're ensuring that the wonder continues. Mao's methods were traditional. He used no instruments, no compass, no GPS, no charts, just stars, just swells, just birds, just knowledge. He maintained his course. He found his way. He reached his destination. The voyage proved that traditional navigation worked. It wasn't legend. It wasn't luck. It was real knowledge, real skill, real achievement. The voyage inspired others. It showed that traditional navigation was still viable. It showed that ancient methods still worked. It helped revive interest in Polynesian navigation. It helped preserve traditional knowledge. It helped ensure that the legacy continued. The voyage was historic. It was important. It was inspiring. Since that first voyage, the Hokule has made many more journeys. It has sailed throughout the Pacific. It has visited many islands. It has inspired new generations. It has helped preserve traditional navigation. It has proven that ancient methods are still viable. It has shown that the legacy lives on. The canoe has become a symbol of traditional knowledge, a symbol of human achievement, a symbol of the connection between past and present. Viking explorers were also remarkable navigators. Crossing the North Atlantic, they reached Iceland, then Greenland, then North America. All of this happened 500 years before Columbus. All using only observation. All using only knowledge. For direction, Vikings used the sun compass, a simple device, a wooden disc with a central pin. By marking the shadow of the pin, they could track the sun's movement, they could find direction, they could navigate. It was simple, but it worked. Sunstones provided another method, special crystals that could find the sun even through clouds, even when the sun was hidden. On cloudy days, in fog, Vikings could use sunstones to find direction. It was an incredible tool. It was an incredible skill. Scientists have studied sunstones. They found that certain crystals, like Iceland spar, can polarize light. When you look through these crystals, you can see patterns that indicate the sun's position. Even when the sun is hidden by clouds. Even when you can't see it directly. Vikings learned to use these crystals. They learned to find the sun. They learned to find direction, even in poor visibility. Archaeologists have found sunstones in Viking sites. They've found crystals that match descriptions in sagas. They've tested them. They've confirmed that they work. The sunstones were real. They were effective. They were valuable tools. They helped Vikings navigate. They helped Vikings explore. They helped Vikings achieve incredible voyages. In 2013, archaeologists found a sunstone on a Viking shipwreck off the coast of Alderney. The crystal was identified as Iceland spar. It matched descriptions in sagas. Scientists tested it. They confirmed that it could find the sun through clouds. The discovery was important. It proved that sunstones were real. It proved that Vikings used them. It proved that the methods worked. Some historians debate how common sunstones were. Were they used on every voyage, or only when needed? The evidence is unclear. But what is clear is that Vikings had the knowledge. They had the tools, they had the skills. They achieved incredible feats. They crossed vast oceans. They reached new lands. They explored. They settled. They created a legacy. The achievement is remarkable, regardless of how common the tools were. The sunstone was especially useful in the North Atlantic, where fog is common, where clouds are frequent, where visibility is often poor. Vikings could use sunstones to find direction, even when they couldn't see the sun, even when they couldn't see the stars. The tool was invaluable. The skill was remarkable. The achievement was incredible. Vikings also used stars. They learned star positions. They learned star paths. They navigated by the heavens. Especially at night. Especially in the long winter nights of the north. Stars were their guide. Stars were their compass. They also used birds. They learned that gulls stay close to shore. They learned that ravens don't like to fly far from land. They learned to read birds. They learned to use them. Birds became their guides. Birds became their tools. Vikings also used dead reckoning. This is where math comes in. Vikings would estimate their speed. Maybe 5 knots in good wind. Maybe 2 knots in light wind. They'd track how long they'd been sailing. Maybe using the sun's position, maybe using stars. They'd track their direction, using the sun compass, using the stars. Then they'd do the math. Speed times time equals distance. They'd plot this on a mental map, and estimate their position. It wasn't perfect. Currents could push them off course. Wind could change direction. Their speed estimates might be wrong, but it was better than nothing. And with all their other methods combined, Vikings could navigate across vast oceans. They could find their way home. They could discover new lands. Think about that for a moment. No GPS, no satellites, no modern technology, just observation, just knowledge, just courage. Vikings crossed the North Atlantic. They reached places Europeans wouldn't find again for centuries. All using methods we might think of as primitive. But they weren't primitive, they were brilliant. Viking voyages were incredible. They crossed the North Atlantic. They faced storms, they faced ice, they faced danger. But they succeeded. They found new lands. They explored, they settled, they created a legacy. They proved that ancient navigation worked. They proved that courage and knowledge could overcome any challenge. The voyage to Iceland was remarkable. Vikings sailed from Norway. They crossed 600 miles of open ocean. They found Iceland. They settled it. They created a culture there, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation, all using only knowledge. The achievement was remarkable. The voyage was historic. The legacy was important. The voyage to Greenland was even more remarkable. Vikings sailed from Iceland. They crossed 200 miles of open ocean. They found Greenland. They settled it. They created colonies there. They maintained them for centuries, all using traditional navigation, all using only observation, all using only knowledge. The achievement was incredible. The voyage was historic. The legacy was important. The voyage to North America was the most remarkable. Vikings sailed from Greenland. They crossed 1,000 miles of open ocean. They found North America. They explored it. They created settlements there. They did it 500 years before Columbus. They did it using traditional navigation. They did it using only observation. They did it using only knowledge. The achievement was extraordinary. The voyage was historic. The legacy was important. The voyage is described in the sagas. The saga of the Greenlanders tells the story. Leif Erikson was the leader. He sailed from Greenland. He crossed the North Atlantic. He found a new land. He called it Vinland. He explored it. He created a settlement there. The voyage was historic. The achievement was remarkable. The legacy was important. Archaeologists have found evidence of this settlement. At Lanso Meadows, in Newfoundland, they found the remains of a Viking village. They found artifacts. They found evidence of Norse presence. The evidence proves that Vikings reached North America. They crossed the North Atlantic. They found a new continent. They explored it. All using traditional navigation. All using only observation. All using only knowledge. The site was discovered in 1960 by Helge Ingstad and Anne Steiningstad. They were Norwegian archaeologists. They found the remains of 8 buildings. They found artifacts like iron nails, bronze pins, and stone tools. They found evidence of Norse presence dating to around 1000 AD. The discovery was historic. It proved that Vikings reached North America. It proved that the sagas were true. It proved that ancient navigation worked. The buildings were well preserved. They were made of turf and wood. They had fireplaces. They had sleeping areas. They had storage spaces. They were designed for long-term use. They showed that Vikings planned to stay. They showed that the voyage was successful. They showed that navigation worked. The buildings are now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They're protected. They're studied. They're visited. They're a reminder of what Vikings achieved. They're a reminder of what ancient navigation made possible. Radiocarbon dating confirmed the age of the settlement. The artifacts date to around 1000 AD. This matches the time described in the sagas. The evidence is clear. Vikings reached North America. They crossed the North Atlantic. They found a new continent. They explored it. All using traditional navigation. All using only observation. All using only knowledge. The discovery was important. The evidence was clear. The legacy was confirmed. The settlement didn't last long. Vikings abandoned it after a few years. But the achievement remains. The voyage was historic. The exploration was remarkable. The legacy is important. It proves that Vikings achieved incredible feats. It proves that ancient navigation worked. It proves that courage and knowledge could overcome any challenge. The reasons for abandonment are unclear. Some historians think it was conflict with native peoples. Some think it was distance from other settlements. Some think it was environmental challenges. But whatever the reason, the achievement remains. Vikings reached North America. They explored it. They created settlements there. They did it 500 years before Columbus. They did it using traditional navigation. They did it using only observation. They did it using only knowledge. The achievement is remarkable. The voyage is historic. The legacy is important. The discovery of Lanso Meadows was important. It proved that the sagas were true. It proved that Vikings reached North America. It proved that ancient navigation worked. It proved that incredible feats were possible. The discovery was historic. The evidence was clear. The legacy was confirmed. Mediterranean sailors also achieved remarkable voyages. They connected Europe, Africa, and Asia. They created trade routes. They spread cultures. They exchanged ideas. They did it using winds and currents. They did it using observation. They did it using knowledge. Phoenician sailors were especially skilled. They sailed throughout the Mediterranean. They sailed along the coast of Africa. They may have sailed around Africa. They created trade networks, they spread their culture, they achieved incredible voyages. Historians have studied Phoenician navigation. They found evidence of extensive trade networks, they found evidence of colonies, they found evidence of exploration. Phoenicians were master navigators. They learnt the winds of the Mediterranean. They learnt the currents. They learnt the patterns. They created knowledge, they passed it down, they built on it, they improved it. Phoenician ships were well designed, they were fast, they were seaworthy, they could handle rough seas, they could travel long distances. They were perfect for exploration, they were perfect for trade, they were perfect for navigation. Phoenicians used these ships to explore, they used them to trade. They used them to connect cultures, they used them to spread knowledge. The Phoenicians may have sailed around Africa. According to ancient sources, they sent an expedition. The expedition sailed south along the African coast. It took 3 years. It returned through the Mediterranean. It proved that Africa could be circumnavigated. It proved that long-distance navigation was possible. It proved that ancient people achieved incredible feats. The voyage was documented by Herodotus, an ancient Greek historian. He wrote that the Phoenicians sailed from the Red Sea. They sailed south along the African coast. They rounded the southern tip. They sailed north along the west coast. They returned through the Mediterranean. The voyage took 3 years. It covered thousands of miles. It proved that long-distance navigation was possible. It proved that ancient people achieved incredible feats. Herodotus wrote about this in his histories. He described how the Phoenicians sailed around Africa. He wrote that they saw the sun on their right side. This detail is important. In the southern hemisphere, the sun appears on the right when facing west. This proves that the Phoenicians actually sailed around Africa. They didn't just make it up. They actually did it. The detail shows that the voyage was real. The achievement was remarkable. The legacy was important. Some modern historians question whether the voyage actually happened. They point out that Herodotus wrote about it hundreds of years later. They question the details. But most historians believe the voyage was real. The details are too specific. The knowledge is too accurate. The achievement was possible. The voyage was likely real. The achievement was remarkable. The legacy was important. The debate continues. Some historians think the voyage happened exactly as described. Some think it was exaggerated. Some think it didn't happen at all. But what is clear is that Phoenicians were skilled navigators. They sailed throughout the Mediterranean. They created trade networks. They spread their culture. They achieved incredible feats. The debate doesn't change the achievement. Phoenicians were master navigators. They achieved incredible voyages. They left a legacy of knowledge. Historians debate whether the voyage actually happened. Some believe it did, some believe it didn't. But the story shows what was possible. It shows what ancient people believed was possible. It shows the knowledge they had. It shows the skills they developed. It shows the achievements they made. The story is important. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is significant. Even if the voyage didn't happen exactly as described, it shows that ancient people understood navigation. They understood that long-distance voyages were possible. They understood that oceans could be crossed. They understood that the world could be explored. The knowledge was there. The skills were there. The achievement was possible. Greek sailors also navigated well. They learned the winds of the Mediterranean. They learned the currents. They learned the patterns. They created maps. They created knowledge, they passed it down, they built on it, they improved it. Greek navigation was sophisticated. They learned to use the stars. They learned to use the sun. They learned to use landmarks. They created star charts. They created sailing directions. They created knowledge. They documented everything. They passed it down. They built on it. They improved it. Greek sailors explored widely. They sailed throughout the Mediterranean. They sailed into the Black Sea. They sailed into the Atlantic. They created colonies. They created trade networks. They spread their culture. They achieved incredible voyages, all using traditional navigation, all using observation, all using knowledge. Greek navigation influenced others. Roman sailors learned from Greeks. They improved on Greek methods. They created better ships. They created better techniques. They built an empire. They did it using navigation. They did it using knowledge. They did it using skill. Roman sailors built on Greek knowledge. They improved navigation. They created better ships. They created better methods. They connected the entire Mediterranean. They created an empire. They did it using navigation. They did it using knowledge. Roman navigation was highly organized. They created sailing directions. They documented routes. They created maps. They maintained lighthouses. They created infrastructure. They supported navigation. They made it safer. They made it more reliable. They made it more efficient. Roman ships were well designed. They were large. They were stable. They could carry cargo. They could carry passengers. They could travel long distances. They were perfect for trade. They were perfect for exploration. They were perfect for empire building. Romans used these ships to connect their empire. They used them to trade. They used them to explore. They used them to spread their culture. Roman navigation methods were sophisticated. They used the stars. They used landmarks. They used sailing directions. They created knowledge. They documented everything. They passed it down. They built on it. They improved it. Roman navigation was the foundation of their empire. It allowed them to connect distant places. It allowed them to maintain control. It allowed them to spread their culture. It allowed them to build an empire. Roman lighthouses were important. They built them along coastlines. They marked important ports. They guided ships safely. They made navigation easier. They made travel safer. They supported the empire. They were engineering marvels. They were symbols of Roman power. They were symbols of Roman knowledge. They were symbols of Roman achievement. The Pharos of Alexandria was the most famous. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It stood over 300 feet tall. It had a fire at the top. It could be seen for miles. It guided ships into the harbor. It was an engineering marvel. It was a symbol of knowledge. It was a symbol of achievement. It showed what was possible. It showed what humans could build. It showed what navigation could achieve. Roman sailing directions were detailed. They described routes. They described landmarks. They described dangers. They described safe harbors. They were like modern guidebooks. They made navigation easier. They made travel safer. They supported the empire. They were valuable. They were important. They were the foundation of Roman navigation. All of these cultures achieved incredible feats. They crossed oceans. They found new lands. They created connections. They spread cultures. They exchanged ideas. They changed the world, all using ancient navigation, all using observation, all using knowledge. The achievements are remarkable. Polynesians settled the entire Pacific. Vikings reached North America. Mediterranean sailors connected continents. All without modern tools. All without compasses. All without GPS. All using only what they could observe. All using only what they could learn. All using only what they could remember. The knowledge was precious. It was passed down carefully. It was tested constantly. It was improved continuously. It evolved. It became more sophisticated. It became more reliable. It became an art. It became a science. It became a legacy. Modern scientists study these achievements. They test the methods. They confirm the accuracy. They are amazed. Ancient navigators achieved incredible precision. They found tiny islands. They crossed vast oceans. They reached new continents, all using only observation, all using only knowledge, all using only skill. The achievements opened the world. They allowed exploration. They allowed discovery. They allowed connection. They allowed trade. They allowed migration. They allowed cultures to meet. They allowed ideas to spread. They changed everything. They made the world smaller. They made the world one. Ancient navigation was one of humanity's greatest achievements. It required observation. It required memory. It required understanding. It required courage. It required dedication. It was an art. It was a science. It was a legacy. It changed the world. Ancient navigation has a lasting legacy. The methods developed thousands of years ago still influence navigation today. The principles remain the same. Observation, knowledge, skill. These are still the foundation of navigation. Even with modern tools, even with modern technology, traditional navigation is being preserved. Modern wayfinders are learning ancient methods. They're teaching others. They're keeping the knowledge alive. They're proving that ancient methods still work. They're showing that traditional knowledge is valuable. They're ensuring that the legacy continues. The Hokulena continues to sail. It has made many voyages using traditional methods. It has crossed the Pacific. It has visited many islands. It has inspired new generations. It has helped revive traditional navigation. It has proven that ancient methods are still viable. It has shown that the legacy lives on. The Hokulena has sailed over 150,000 nautical miles. It has visited over 150 ports. It has traveled around the world. It has inspired thousands of people. It has helped preserve traditional navigation. It has helped ensure that the knowledge continues. It has become a symbol of traditional knowledge, a symbol of human achievement, a symbol of the connection between past and present. The voyages have been carefully planned. Each voyage has a purpose. Each voyage teaches lessons. Each voyage preserves knowledge. Each voyage inspires others. The Hokulena has become more than a canoe. It has become a symbol of traditional knowledge, a symbol of human achievement, a symbol of the connection between past and present. The crew members are carefully selected. They must learn traditional navigation. They must master the skills. They must understand the knowledge. They must respect the legacy. They become wayfinders. They become keepers of knowledge. They become teachers. They become inspirations. They ensure that the knowledge continues. They ensure that the legacy lives on. The voyages have been carefully documented. Scientists have studied them. They've confirmed the accuracy. They've been amazed. The traditional methods work. They're accurate. They're reliable. They're viable. The voyages have proven that ancient navigation is not just history. It's not just legend. It's real. It's valuable. It's important. The documentation is important. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is significant. Each voyage has been carefully planned. The route is chosen. The crew is selected. The knowledge is reviewed. The skills are tested. The voyage begins. The navigation is performed. The destination is reached. The knowledge is confirmed. The skills are validated. The legacy is continued. Each voyage is a test. Each voyage is a lesson. Each voyage is an inspiration. The Hokulena has inspired new generations. Young people are learning traditional navigation. They're learning the star paths. They're learning to read swells. They're learning to read birds. They're learning everything. They're becoming wayfinders. They're continuing the legacy. They're ensuring that the knowledge survives. They're ensuring that the wonder continues. Modern navigators still use celestial navigation. They still use stars. They still use the sun. They still use the moon. Even with modern tools as backup, even with GPS available, celestial navigation is still taught, it's still practiced, it's still valuable, it's still a skill. The US Navy still teaches celestial navigation. They require it for certain positions. They know that GPS can fail. They know that technology can break. They know that traditional methods are valuable. They know that knowledge is important. They ensure that the skills are maintained. They ensure that the knowledge continues. Commercial sailors also learn celestial navigation. It's required for certain licenses. It's tested on exams. It's practiced on ships. Even with modern tools available, even with GPS everywhere, celestial navigation is still valued. It's still taught. It's still practiced. It's still important. Recreational sailors also learn celestial navigation. Many enjoy the challenge. Many appreciate the skill. Many value the knowledge. They learn to use sextants. They learn to use star charts. They learn to navigate by the heavens. They continue the tradition. They maintain the skills. They preserve the knowledge. The sextant is a modern tool, but it uses ancient principles. It measures the angle between the horizon and a star. It allows navigators to determine their position. It's more accurate than ancient methods. But the principles are the same. Observation, knowledge, skill. These are still the foundation. The tool has changed, but the principles remain. The sextant was invented in the 18th century, but it uses principles that ancient navigators understood. The angle between the horizon and a star tells you your latitude. Ancient navigators understood this. They used it, they navigated by it. The sextant just makes it more accurate. The principles are the same, the foundation is the same, the legacy continues. Modern navigators still learn to use sextants, they still learn celestial navigation. They still learn the ancient principles. Even with GPS available, even with modern tools everywhere, the knowledge is still valuable. The skills are still important. The legacy continues. The connection between ancient and modern navigation is clear. Ancient navigators look to the stars. Modern navigators use sextants. But both use the same principles. Both use observation. Both use knowledge. Both use skill. The tools have changed, but the principles remain. The foundation remains. The legacy remains. Star charts are also modern tools, but they document ancient knowledge. They show star positions. They show star paths. They show the patterns that ancient navigators memorized. The charts make the knowledge accessible. But the knowledge is ancient. The patterns are ancient. The principles are ancient. Modern navigators combine old and new. They use modern tools, but they understand ancient principles. They appreciate the knowledge. They value the skills. They respect the legacy. They continue the tradition. They maintain the skills. They preserve the knowledge. The connection between past and present is clear. The legacy continues. The wonder remains. The principles of ancient navigation still apply. Observation is still important. Knowledge is still valuable. Skill is still necessary. Even with modern tools, even with modern technology, the foundation remains. The principles remain. The legacy remains. Modern navigation is built on ancient principles. GPS uses satellites, but the principles are the same. Observation, knowledge, skill. These are still the foundation. Modern tools make navigation easier, but the principles remain. The foundation remains. The legacy remains. The connection is clear. Ancient navigators looked to the stars. Modern navigators use satellites. But both use observation, both use knowledge, both use skill. The methods have changed, but the principles remain. The foundation remains. The legacy remains. Ancient navigation shows what's possible. It shows the power of observation. It shows the power of knowledge. It shows the power of skill. It shows what humans can achieve. It shows what's possible when people dedicate themselves to learning. It shows what's possible when people work with nature. It shows what's possible when people trust their knowledge. The achievement is remarkable. Ancient navigators crossed vast oceans. They found tiny islands. They reached new continents. They did it all without modern tools. They did it all using only observation. They did it all using only knowledge. The achievement is one of humanity's greatest. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is important. The wonder continues. The achievement opened the world. It allowed exploration. It allowed discovery. It allowed connection. It allowed trade. It allowed migration. It allowed cultures to meet. It allowed ideas to spread. It changed everything. It made the world smaller. It made the world one. It created the world we know today. The knowledge was precious. It was the difference between life and death, between finding land and being lost, between success and failure. It was treated with respect. It was protected. It was valued. It was the most important knowledge a culture could have. It was the foundation of exploration. It was the foundation of discovery. It was the foundation of connection. The knowledge was often kept secret. Not everyone was allowed to learn it. Only those who showed promise. Only those who showed dedication. Only those who earned the right. The knowledge was protected. It was guarded. It was valued. It was the most important knowledge a culture could have. The secrecy was important. The knowledge was valuable. It was the difference between life and death, between finding land and being lost, between success and failure. It had to be protected. It had to be guarded. It had to be valued. It was the most important knowledge a culture could have. The selection process was careful. Only those who showed promise were chosen. Only those who showed dedication were selected. Only those who earned the right were taught. The process was selective. It was careful. It was necessary. It ensured that only the best learned the knowledge. It ensured that the knowledge was preserved. It ensured that the legacy continued. The knowledge was passed down through specific channels, from master to apprentice, from parent to child, from generation to generation. The channels were carefully maintained. They were protected. They were valued. They ensured that the knowledge continued. They ensured that the skills were maintained. They ensured that the legacy lived on. The process of learning was long. It took years, sometimes decades. Apprentices would start young. They would learn the basics first. Simple star positions, simple directions. Then they would learn more complex patterns. Star paths, swell patterns, bird behavior. They would practice constantly. They would test their knowledge. They would improve their skills. The master would test the apprentice constantly. They would ask them to identify stars. They would ask them to read swells. They would ask them to navigate. They would watch their performance. They would correct mistakes. They would teach lessons. They would ensure the knowledge was passed down correctly. They would ensure the skills were maintained. They would ensure the legacy continued. The testing was comprehensive. Masters would test knowledge. They would test skills. They would test understanding. They would test everything. The testing was constant. It was thorough. It was necessary. It ensured that only the best became wayfinders. It ensured that the knowledge was preserved. It ensured that the legacy continued. The relationship between master and apprentice was special. The master had dedicated their life to navigation. They had learned from their master. They had become experts. They had achieved incredible feats. Now they were passing it down. They were teaching the next generation. They were ensuring that the knowledge continued. They were ensuring that the legacy lived on. The apprentice had to prove themselves. They had to show dedication. They had to show skill. They had to show understanding. They had to earn the knowledge. They had to earn the trust. They had to earn the right to become a wayfinder. The process was long. The process was difficult. But it was necessary. It ensured that only the best became wayfinders. It ensured that the knowledge was preserved. It ensured that the legacy continued. The legacy continues. Traditional navigation is being preserved. Modern wayfinders are learning ancient methods. New generations are discovering the wonder. The knowledge is being passed down. The skills are being taught. The legacy lives on. The wonder continues. The achievement is remembered. The ocean is still vast. It's still challenging. It's still dangerous. But we understand it better now. We have tools. We have knowledge. We have safety. But we should remember. We should remember what ancient people achieved. We should remember their skills. We should remember their knowledge. We should remember their courage. We should remember their wonder. Ancient navigation opened the world. It allowed exploration. It allowed discovery. It allowed connection. It allowed trade. It allowed migration. It allowed cultures to meet. It allowed ideas to spread. It changed everything. It made the world smaller. It made the world one. It created the world we know today. The legacy continues. Traditional navigation is being preserved. Modern wayfinders are learning ancient methods. New generations are discovering the wonder. The knowledge is being passed down. The skills are being taught. The legacy lives on. The wonder continues. The achievement is remembered. Ancient navigation was one of humanity's greatest achievements. It required observation. It required memory. It required understanding. It required courage. It required dedication. It was an art. It was a science. It was a legacy. It changed the world. And its legacy continues today. The achievement is remarkable when you think about it. Ancient navigators crossed vast oceans. They found tiny islands. They reached new continents. They did it all without modern tools. They did it all using only observation. They did it all using only knowledge. The achievement is one of humanity's greatest. The knowledge is valuable. The legacy is important. The wonder continues. The knowledge was accumulated over thousands of years. Each generation added to it. Each culture contributed. Each navigator improved it. The knowledge grew. It became more sophisticated. It became more reliable. It became an art. It became a science. It became a legacy. The legacy continues today. Traditional navigation is being preserved. Modern wayfinders are learning ancient methods. New generations are discovering the wonder. The knowledge is being passed down. The skills are being taught. The legacy lives on. The wonder continues. The achievement is remembered. The connection between past and present is clear. The legacy continues. The wonder remains. Now, as our journey through ancient navigation comes to a close, you can let the images in your mind grow softer, like waves settling after a storm. You have sailed with ancient navigators across vast oceans. You have learned how they used the stars, the sun, the moon, and the ocean itself as their guides. You have discovered how Polynesian wayfinders crossed the entire Pacific, how Viking explorers reached North America, how Mediterranean sailors connected continents. You have understood the incredible skills required, the observation, the memory, the knowledge, the courage. You have seen how ancient people achieved remarkable feats, using only what they could observe, using only what they could learn, using only what they could remember. From the first navigators who looked to the stars, all the way to the modern wayfinders keeping the knowledge alive, Navigation has been one of humanity's greatest achievements. It has allowed exploration, it has allowed discovery, it has allowed connection, it has changed the world. The story of ancient navigation is the story of human ingenuity, of observation, of knowledge, of skill, of courage. It's the story of how humans learned to read nature like a map, how they learned to navigate by the heavens, how they learned to cross oceans using only observation and knowledge. And tonight, as you rest, you are part of that same long story. The world you live in was shaped by ancient navigation. The connections between cultures, the exchange of ideas, the exploration of the planet. All of it traces back to those first navigators who looked to the stars and found their way. Every time you use a map, you follow in their footsteps. Every time you find your way, you use principles they developed. Every time you explore, you continue their legacy. The wonder of navigation continues. The achievement is remembered. The legacy lives on. So let your breath slow, like waves settling after a long journey. Let your thoughts drift like a boat on calm seas, light and peaceful. You are safe, warm and carried by a chain of discoveries that stretches back thousands of years. The stars are still there, the ocean is still vast, the knowledge is still valuable, the legacy continues, the wonder remains. And somewhere, right now, someone is learning to navigate, someone is looking to the stars, someone is reading the ocean, someone is continuing the legacy. The story of ancient navigation is not finished. It continues every time someone learns to read the stars, every time someone learns to read the ocean. Every time someone learns to navigate, the knowledge is being passed down, the skills are being taught, the legacy lives on. From those first navigators who looked to the heavens, all the way to the modern wayfinders keeping the knowledge alive, navigation has been one of humanity's greatest achievements. It has opened the world, it has connected cultures, it has changed everything, and its legacy continues today. So rest well. Dream of stars guiding ships across vast oceans, of wayfinders reading nature's signs, of explorers discovering new lands, of the incredible achievement of ancient navigation, of the wonder of human ingenuity, of the legacy that continues today. The story of ancient navigation is your story, it's our story, it's the human story. A story of observation, of knowledge, of skill, of courage. A story that started thousands of years ago. A story that continues today. A story that will continue tomorrow. The stars will still guide, the ocean will still teach, the knowledge will still be passed down, the legacy will continue, the wonder will remain. And as you drift off to sleep, remember that you are part of this long story, a story of human achievement, a story of exploration, a story of connection, a story that spans thousands of years, a story that continues with you. Good night.